Welcome to the Minnesota DNR Outdoor Skills and Stewardship on Bison, Buffalo, or Tatanka. Today's guest speakers are Richard Milda of the Mdewakanton Sioux and Molly Tranel Nelson from the Minnesota DNR. Welcome, guys. Thank you for coming in and chatting with us today. And I think we're going to start with Richard first, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the stage is yours, Richard. You go ahead and let us know.
Madakiapi. Shante washena pe Tuesday pe apido esh wazi wachiwichasha demie esh is it ke wadam bishit che abzalaga bihilidik. My name is Richard Milda, and my Dakota name is Dancing Man from the North. And through my mother, my birth mother, I said, she is enrolled Crow, but also being Abzalaga, she's also Oglala, Lakota. And through that family lineage and that family branch, she's also Mdewakanton Dakota, close family ties from the Fort Thompson area reservation along the Missouri River north of I-90. My father is Gila River Indian Community, and that's where I'm currently enrolled today. And I work for the Mdewakanton Sioux Community Pate Optaye program, which is a bison program that we are in the plans and in the works of having. You heard our host say Tatanka, which literally translates into big meat. Tado is meat, and tanka is big. And if hunting, and if you've harvested a tatanka, then someone would say, what kind? It could be a moose, it could be a bison, elk, big animals that can feed a lot. But today, Tatanka is seen as and heard as buffalo bison. Another word you heard me use is pate te optaye program, and that's the name our work group adopted, and we talk to elders and different language speakers, and some of the teachings that I've had regarding the naming of our bison program. And Pate Optaye refers to, Pate is the bison, Optaye is what you see when the herd is grazing, moving. They're constantly moving. The family dynamics is very visible in regards to where the babies are, where the young are, where the females are within the herd, and the males and bulls. And you can see that whole dynamic in motion, and that's the optaye part of how the herd of the Pate Oyate move around. But again, both terms have used to be referred to as bison, Tatanka Oyate. Then someone will say, oh, you're talking about a bison herd. But I've said that word to as someone who is a first language speaker and rarely speaks English. I said that to them once, and they said, what kind? Was it a herd of elk, or was it a herd of moose, or was it a couple of moose? The tonka literally means big meat of something, of one of our four-legged um, relatives. And so and in that, what I'm saying, is just at the surface of our relationship with Teoyate. Um, they were everything to us: clothing, food, tools, thread, glue. Um, even when I talk with different people today, they kind of shy away from um, when I talk about this because they're not used to it. But their dung was also fuel. Because out in the prairie, if you ever go out west and you can see there's no trees, or there's very little trees except along the creeks and rivers, and then you'll run into some cottonwood, which burns real fast. It's not a hardwood that burns for a long time. And so we used um, the dung as a heating source, and I have burnt that and smelt it, and it's almost a sweet cinnamon smell. It's almost it's not unpleasant. In fact, it's like I've said. And then I don't know, I've been out seeing fires on the prairie that I've started, and then where people have had cattle, you can see where the grass is burnt and black, and then the cattle's dung will be out there still burning. If you ever been on a accidental prairie fire, so I would I'd share that with whoever was with me when we saw that, and they said it makes sense that, well, everything was still burnt out. The cattle's droppings were still burning, and you can see where they were all over the pasture. It was interesting. Um, but again, the bison were very uh, woven part into into our Dakota people, and not just Dakota people, but other tribes, and um, we today we can't even fathom how much bison were here. Um, I remember traveling, and there's this restaurant bar, and on the wall there's a story of these people down in Kansas. These two cowboys wanted to go kill some bison because they got paid as a part of the extermination of bison, because they figured out that the bison were so connected to indigenous peoples that if they um, killed the bison as much as possible, then we would be more vulnerable, and not having our one of our main resources of food, clothing, and tools. And so they went out to do this hunt to get as many as possible, and they came upon this herd, and it started stampeding, and they had to hide under this creek bed with a slight cliff with their horses, and it took 2 days for that herd to pass. I can't even imagine just holding my horse underneath this embankment for cover, and for 2 days for a herd to go over, a herd of anything for that matter. And so to fathom that, and then to go down to where Minnesota has had zero. They were genocided out of this state, this region, by the 1850s. And they ranged from northern Canada all the way down south towards the desert at one time. And eastern bison, you got woodland bison, prairie, and then the southern bison down in your more desert regions. And so they're just a very, very adaptable and tolerant species of that we've had here in the Americas. And so our like I just said earlier when I was explaining who I was, my mother's name, I was saying in there is her Indian name, her Abzalaga name is Good Buffalo Woman. And so the name of the Pateo Yate, the Tatanka, is right in some of our names as as uh as human beings, as people. We've taken those names because they're such a woven part of who we are and in our culture. And so we're very excited to share stories. We have songs and ceremonies that are where the bison, the Tatanka are very included, where without any of that some of them wouldn't take place. We would need their part of them, their skulls, their hides, their meat, or wasna, which is a dried meat and berries, and the kidney fat used to make wasna, which was a very integral part of spiritual food. And so yeah, I want to thank this panel for having me, and look very excited. I've had a lot of wonderful teachers who are not with us anymore, some living treasures that are not here, that I've had the opportunity to travel with and be with in ceremony with, that I received some teachings regarding the Pateo Yate. In fact, our one of our most sacred prayer items, the chanupa, was given to us by the white buffalo calf pipe woman. A woman had brought us the chanupa to pray with to the Creator, and she took the form of a bison, of a pateo, a female buffalo, and we still have that pipe today. It's kept at Owl Creek in South Dakota by the Looking Horse family, and I've seen it and prayed with it, and had the opportunity to go into the lodge where it's kept, and then every year they bring it out and rewrap it, and it's quite the gathering. And that's just an example of how important the Tatanka were to us, our Dakota culture, Lakota culture. And again, not just us, but other tribes also had the Pateo Yate woven into their culture and ceremonies. Very old, very ancient relationship. So we're very excited to be looking at and planning and having our relatives return to our tribal lands here in the Shakopee Mdewakanton community. So yeah, I think I've covered what I wanted to say. I'm trying to think. Also had a lot of current workings with the Pateo Yate, with Rosalie Little Thunder. She took me as a brother, and she did a spiritual walk from Bear Butte to Yellowstone regarding the bison slaughter that was happening there. And I spent a lot of time with her on that issue, and got to see how different agencies, different people, ranchers, and their attitude towards our relative, the bison. And so it was a heated issue. It was a very heated issue for a long time, but it's getting better, and very thankful for all those who have worked to bring back and bringing back the Pateo Yate and the different organizations that do that, and all those who helped and bring back our relative. So thank you for listening, and I don't know, I think I had 15 minutes or so, but yeah.
Richard, thank you so much for that talk about what the buffalo means to you and to your people. I think we're going to move over to Molly now, and we'll hear what Molly has to say. Molly, take it away.
All right, it didn't want to unmute me there. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Great. So today I'm going to talk about our Minnesota Bison Conservation Herd. So my name is Molly Tranel Nelson, and I am with the Department of Natural Resources with the Division of Parks and Trails. So my job is to help protect and manage the natural and cultural resources in state parks, trails, and public water access sites. And the best part of my job is I have 2 bison herds that I help to manage within those state parks. So that's what I'm here to discuss today. Now my slides are not advancing. There we go. So just giving you a little overview of what we're going to talk about. And Richard set it up really nicely with kind of the history of the bison in North America. And I'll just show you some of those ranges he was talking about. And then we're going to talk about specifically to Minnesota, our Minnesota Conservation Herd and how we began and what our goals are for that herd. And also I'm going to talk about how we manage that herd. And then how we manage the genetics and tests for genetics in our herds. And then I'll end with tying back in with Richard, the story of bison and people in bison and how those have built partnerships with us for our herd. And then we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions for both Richard and I in discussion. So this picture here is the range of bison in North America. The brown is the plains bison. Those are the ones, you know, people typically think the big herds going across the prairie. But there were also wood bison, and those were typically further north into Canada and Alaska. So the brown area is where we used to have the plains bison, and the black dots are where they are now. This was a study done in 2010, so there's a few new locations that aren't on here. But as you can see, they really were reduced drastically. So this we call the bison bottleneck, from going from 20 million or more animals across North America. And by the end of the 1800s, they were down to, some say 1,000, somewhere around 1,000. And they were just hunted to extinction nearly. And this was done purposely, as Richard mentioned, both because the Army was encouraging people to do this and paying people. But there was also a great commercial demand. In the picture on the right, you will see is bison skulls. And they would be pulverized and used as fertilizer. The bones, there was, people would just go out and collect the bones and ship them out on the railroads to the east. And so, you know, by the late, by 1890, a guy from the Bronx Zoo named William Hornaday, he went out there and he was going to get some bison for zoo exhibits, and he couldn't find any. And he was realizing that the bison were gone. And so he's kind of credited with saving the bison because he went out and collected some and started breeding them. And also some ranchers started breeding bison on their cattle ranches. but it wasn't the kind of conservation we think of today. They would often still be shooting them as they're conserving them. So it was basically just trying to grab some of the few animals before they were gone. What also happened at this time is as these ranchers had them on their ranches, they were trying to breed a more superior domesticated cattle. So they did a mix, a hybrid of bison and cattle, and those are sometimes called beefalo. And this is from the American Beefalo Association. People raise these herds today, and there's various amounts of bison and cattle genes mixed together. But what happened is because we were down to 1,000 animals, those cattle genes got into the entire bison genome. And now all of our bison in North America that are on conservation herds at Yellowstone that are wild, nearly 90% of them have some form of cattle genes in them. So this is important because they might be less hardy with these cattle were not evolved on the North American prairie, and bison were. So these cattle genes could be a detriment to them. And we do see that they're often, the more genes they have that are cattle, they're smaller in size, they're less hardy. So that's just a picture there of a bison with her calf, which you can see is very much looks like a cow, a domesticated cow. So in 1961, we got a herd, if you could call it that, 3 animals at Blue Mound State Park. And that was the start of kind of this bison journey for us in Minnesota state parks. They came from Fort Niobrara. And for a long time, we managed them out on the prairie, but we didn't really think about the genetics or conservation of the, bison overall. And so in 2011, we got some funding and decided, let's start testing the genetics and see what we have. And so this really led us to start thinking strategically about how to manage and conserve this herd. And you'll see a link in the chat, our Division of Parks and Trails strategic plan for bison management. Because we're a state park, we have to do plans, and they are open to the public for input. We get input, and then we make that official. So that's what we follow in our bison conservation. And I'm just going to go through some of the goals there, and you can read the full plan online. So the herd is managed for conservation purposes. This means we're not doing it for meat production or commercial reasons. There are many private herds throughout North America, but they aren't necessarily raising the animals for conservation. And this could be important because a meat producer might want a more docile or easier to handle animal. They're going to select for that. But out in the wild, those are going to be the first animals that get eaten by predators. So while commercial herds can provide, some conservation benefits, they're not specifically for the best genetics. So that's why we want to make that distinction, that is our purpose is for the conservation. They are located within Minnesota's historic bison range, which you see here. We had Blue Mound State Park, like I said, got animals in 1961. Minneopa State Park, we started a herd there in 2015. And then the Minnesota Zoo also has animals from our herd on exhibit. And I will show you later, we have some additional partners online in Dakota County, Spring Lake Park, and Olmsted. They have a zoo that also now has our animals. So these herd members are wild animals and allowed to behave as close to wild as practical. They were a migratory species and now they're penned in and are fenced in, so they're not completely wild. Our goal is to conserve these bison genetics, and we manage them at a population level. So we're not managing for an individual animal. We try to manage the health of each animal, of course, but we're managing them as a whole population. We really need to be up to 500 animals to sustain genetic viability into the future without continually bringing in new animals. So that is our goal, but we don't currently have enough land just in state parks to meet that goal. Right now we're at about 150 animals going into winter, and then we have about 50 calves across our herds in the spring, so we get about up to 200. So we want to conserve the plains bison as a wildlife species with genetics that include as much diversity as possible and as little cattle DNA as possible. And we do this in a sustainable way by putting the bison out on the prairie where we can, and also managing them as part of the prairie community. So we're doing things like patch burn grazing. We're also looking at rare species, making sure the bison aren't negatively impacting other things like grassland birds. And so we're trying to manage them as part of that missing piece because bison were so important to the prairie community as a whole. We also want to provide opportunities for interpretation and observation of the bison in these prairie communities, and for people to really get up and see the bison and experience them. We feel like they're ambassadors for the whole ecosystem, and you might come out to see the bison, but you could maybe get interested in something else. For example, I took my son out to Minneopa to see the bison, and while we were out there, we saw an American bittern right along the road from our car. And he didn't know what it was. He called it the mystery bird, and it really got him excited about birds. And so we feel like the bison can really help people understand the whole prairie. And then our other goal is to explore the cultural resource history and protect those sites within our bison areas. So at Minneopa State Park, as we were getting ready to reintroduce bison, we did an archaeological survey and found that people have been using that site for over 8,000 years as kind of a hunting and gathering area. And they were sitting there making tools, and we were finding the leftovers of those tools. And so really they were probably sitting there waiting for herds or looking for bison herds. So it really just shows the importance of these animals on that site. So our herd is unique because when we did get those genetics tested, we found that we had little to no bovine cattle DNA within the herd, and especially on the mitochondrial DNA, which is what comes from the mother. And so this was a surprise for us, and we realized that our genetic composition and diversity was really equal to those federal conservation herds, the big ones you think of out at Yellowstone and the National Bison Range. And we realized that we could really help support those national bison conservation efforts. And that is now part of our goal to do that. So we manage the bison in specially designed handling facilities. And we have one at Blue Mountain State Park, at the Minnesota Zoo, and then one at Minneopa now, just came online a few years ago. And the animals are brought in each fall for a vet check. And this is a picture of a bison getting a COVID test. And we vaccinate them for a couple of things. Because there are domestic cattle near our bison herds, we do have to do some vaccinations because cattle can bring in diseases to the bison. And then we also test them for genetics. We test them for parasites and just the overall health of the herd. We sort out the animals that need to move. For example, if a young female that was born on that site is starting to get to breeding age, we need to move her out so that the herd bull, who is her father, doesn't start inbreeding with her. So we're always constantly moving animals and sorting them in the fall at the end of the year. And then surplus animals are removed from the herd, and we do that through an auction. And first, our animals are moved around to our partners that need them. But because we're having 50 calves every year, we often have surplus animals, and so then they are auctioned off. We do genetic testing at this time, and a blood and hair sample are taken, and then we submit them to a lab at Texas A&M. And you can see there, we just pull a little bit of their tail hair and take a vial of blood. And then we use that information to help create what we call a herd book. And the zoo does this for tigers and giraffes and bison. And so they're really valuable partner for managing this for us. We can tell how many animals we have at every location, who their parents are, which bulls are breeding, because it isn't always the big guy that gets 100% of the breeding. We were surprised to find. And then they're each put in with a little transponder. You can see from this picture, there's a little button tag on the ear, and it's similar to like a microchip your vet would do for your dog or cat. And then we can just tell without branding which animal it is. And then this helps us just track our composition of each population. So what we do with that is we put it into this pie chart. So if you think of all the federal herds, there's 8 core federal herds in North America that are the conservation herds. And so we look at our herd and we compare it to those herds for the genetics. So each piece of this pie is telling us how closely related our genetics are to that other herd. So for example, Wind Cave, which is in the orange here, that is where we got a bull from. So he's having calves, their genetics are showing up in our population, and we can see that Wind Cave is really well represented in our herd. But you can see Yellowstone at 1%, the little pink sliver. That's because you can't get animals from Yellowstone very easily. There's legal restrictions on moving them. Those are kind of the hardest to get genetics. And so we're not well represented. So our goal is to have each piece of this pie be the same size. Once we do that, we've got the most amount of genetics we can get. So this was when we started our first year of testing, and then here's where we are closer now from 2020. As you can see, the Wind Cave population in the orange went down a little bit. That piece got smaller. Wichita Mountain got bigger, which is this light blue at 26%, because we brought a bull in from there. And you'll see that Yellowstone, that 2%, it went up from 1% to 2%. That's because we did get a yearling bull with Yellowstone genetics. We brought him in from Colorado, working with Colorado State University, and he will start breeding. And actually, I think he started having 2 calves last year, and we'll have more calves this year. And so that Yellowstone piece of the pie will get bigger, and that's our goal. Another way to look at it is just like this. If your maximum amount of genetic diversity is at the number 1, and we started way down here at the bottom, we're working our way up towards 1. And it just shows that everything we're doing is making progress slowly year by year. So I mentioned how we really want to tell the bison story. We feel like each herd location has a story to tell, and we encourage people to visit all the locations because you're going to get a different experience at each one. So at the Minnesota Zoo, they talk a lot about bison behavior because you're going to see the animals up close interacting with each other. You'll be able to see when they're angry, how they raise their tail and things like that. At Minneopa and Blue Mounts, it's more about prairie ecology. And Blue Mounts specifically, we focus on prairie because they have 500 plus acres to roam on, and it feels like the big open western prairies, and you can really see a lot of other prairie species while you're out there. And then at Minneopa, as I mentioned, with the rich cultural history there, we really focus on the significance of the bison in Dakota culture. And we've had help with this because it's not our story to tell. A Dakota language professor from the Mankato State University helped us with a bilingual Dakota English panel that's at Minneopa. And so people can really get more than one perspective of the history of people and bison. We help tell this story at Minneopa also with volunteers, and we have people who are called bison ambassadors, and anyone's welcome to join as a bison ambassador. You take a training, and they work during the busy times of the year, during the weekends and the summers, and help reach out to our visitors and help tell that story. Minneopa has a wildlife drive that goes down the middle of the range, and we want to make sure people know not to get out of their cars and know how to safely enjoy them. And then once they drive up to the top to the overlook, there's bison ambassadors up there with spotting scopes and bison bones and things to just learn more about the animals after you've seen them up close. So this has been a really helpful way for us to reach out to visitors. At Blue Mountains, it's a completely different experience. As I mentioned, it's a large area, and sometimes the bison are hard to see. So we got funding to get a prairie tour vehicle, and you can see the picture of it right there. It is a ADA accessible, so you can, there's a lift on it, you can take a wheelchair on it, you can take children with car seats on it. And there's a 90-minute tour where a park naturalist will take you through the bison range and explain the prairie and look for different prairie wildlife. And we used to call it the bison buggy, but people thought that the bison were pulling a wagon. That's what was happening. So we had to rename it the prairie tour vehicle. And if you're interested in doing that, you can go to the Blue Mountains website. The links will be available to see how to sign up for that tour. So the success of this conservation herd is really about partnerships. So I mentioned we started, in 2011, 2012 with the Minnesota Zoo partnering. We agreed to work together to preserve, not just bison, but actually other prairie species. We're also partnering with the Dakota skipper, which is an endangered butterfly in Minnesota. So it's not legally binding, but everyone just agrees that, this is what we're going to work for. So each partner owns their own herd on whatever land it is. So now Dakota County Parks has a herd, so they own that herd. They're responsible for the financial cost. And then we all agree that we're going to manage the genetics and the disease concerns together. So we move animals constantly between partners, and then we also coordinate on public relations and outreach. So here's our formal partners right now: the Minnesota Zoo, DNR, Dakota County Parks, and Olmsted County. And then Richard is here today to represent the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux Community, who've provided financial support for us. And then, as I mentioned, the Dakota language instructor who helped us with interpretation. So come visit us. We'd really love to have you come out and see our bison. At Minneopa, the Bison Drive is open all the days except for Wednesday. And right now it's actually closed because the road is so muddy. We'll have to keep it closed a few weeks during spring thaw until that road dries out. But you can hike around the enclosure any time of year. Same with Blue Mountains, hiking around the enclosure, or the Prairie Tour vehicle in the summer. And the Minnesota Zoo is also visible all year round. So just wanted to give a shout out to Dakota County, where their bison are going to be at Spring Lake Park. They were put there, I think it was 5 animals this fall, and now they will be, sorry, that should see fall of 22 they were put in, but they'll be available to the public in spring of 23. And this is just where they're at. You could go to the Dakota County Park website to find more information on viewing them. So come for the bison and stay for the prairie. I just wanted to show you how you can get a different experience even in different seasons. This is our bison out in the summer with the beautiful goldenrod blooming in late summer. And then this is more what it looks like right now. And that's our bison drive that goes kind of down the middle. So with that, I'll just mention a thank you to our project funding partners. We are funded through the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. A lot of people call this lottery money. And then the Clean Water Land and Legacy Amendment has also been a big source of funding, as well as each of our partners have their own funding as well. So with that, we can open it up.
What an outstanding presentation, guys. Questions are coming in, so go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A. And Richard, you got a thank you from Aaron for your knowledge. And what are your hopes for the future as far as bison in Minnesota go? I think you're muted.
Okay, there we go. Yeah. As I was saying, the core relationship between the bison and us humans was they gave themselves to us. They volunteered their life to us. That we're different tribes have different names for themselves, and but the Dakota people, the bison, pitied us and gave them of themselves the meat because there were so many of them. They were at the time they were stronger, they were more numbered, and they volunteered to give themselves so we may live, we can eat, and they're high protein meat, and so hopefully different tribes can partake in eating and having bison. People who have who are economically stressed, um, and different programs on the reservations have a diabetic program where bison is a big part of that. So, but yeah, it's to my hope is that Indigenous people in this state can enjoy uh, a bison roast, once a week or once a while to partake in some of that healthy eating.
Very good. Terry was wondering, are bison still huntable?
Today, like we've heard, a traditional hunt is probably not likely. Maybe on some reservations, like the Crow tribe has their herd on 20 square miles, and the the probability of someone wanting to do that on horseback is probable, but for the most part, you're looking at a pasture, and having the bison get all um, full of adrenaline and running, they can do amazing things as far as how high they can jump, what they can do when they're being stressed, and how dangerous it could be. Um, so more than likely, you're most likely to have a traditional harvest, a ceremonial harvest. Um, so that's more what I would encourage people to do if able.
Okay. So our next question is from Brad. Given the ample amount of bison that were historically present, what was their main predator?
Oh, it was wolves,
Yep.
bear, grizzlies,
Yep.
and it was the ones that were weaker, sicker. Um, you know, they found their way to those predators.
Okay. Terry was wondering about the Como Zoo, Molly. Do they have buffalo bison?
That's a good question. I don't know. I've never been to that zoo. They're not part of our partnership.
Okay.
So I guess I don't know the answer to that.
The next question says, how much land does a single animal need? How many acres?
It depends on the land. So at Minneopa State Park, where we have bison, our soils are 18 inches deep. That is not a productive soil. It's rocky, it's gravelly. And the reason many of our state parks are like that, because the good soils got farmed and are no longer native prairie. So a lot of our lands are those marginable soils. So at Minneopa, we don't do it per animal. We do it per animal unit. So we use the weight of the animal. and we try to use about 50% of the prairie grass available. Bison, pretty much 90% of their diet is grass. So we do a conservation grazing plan based on the production of each site. So per acre is going to differ from Blue Mounds to Minneopa.
Okay. Next question comes from Mary. Where is the DNR thinking about establishing additional herds to help reach that 500 animal optimum?
So we're kind of at our limit for state parklands in the southern region. And so now we're looking, that's why we've brought in a lot of partners, because we realize we just don't have the land in state parks. We're starting to explore, the Nature Conservancy often co-manages WMAs with us and large tracts of land, but nothing official as of yet, just exploring, where the next place could be. But I'd say the most recent ones are private and county and other partnerships that are coming up.
Megan sent in our next question, and when will the bison at the Minnesota Zoo, I think she was thinking about being viewed, is there a specific start date this summer?
Oh, at the zoo, you can see them pretty much year round. At Dakota County Parks, I'm not sure their exact start date there, but their website does have information on when, because they're going to move those animals from a pasture that is not very visible up into a more visible pasture in the spring.
Okay. Terry came in with a question. Is there a herd before Rochester? Do you know anything about them?
Yeah, that's probably there's a lot of private herds. There is a private herd over that way. And then Olmsted County at the zoo there, they have the herd, which is near Rochester.
Okay. He also added a thank you for all you and the others are doing. I also like the history. This is amazing. Our next question says, do you ever use artificial insemination to build your gene pool?
We do not. We've been bringing bulls in. However, the Yellowstone yearling bull that I mentioned that we got from Colorado, he's a bit of a test tube baby. Because it's so hard to get animals out of Yellowstone because of the disease and legal, there's a lot of issues, political and legal issues at Yellowstone animals. So when there was a cull at Yellowstone, they went in and collected semen and embryos, and they have surrogate mothers at Colorado State University, and they use a process that was developed in humans for AIDS patients, and they wash them to make sure that no disease is being carried into the surrogate. And that is how we got our yearling bull. He was born that way. So we do use a little bit of that, but most of our animals are born naturally.
KC says, are there any plans to use the Blue Stem Preserve by Glidden for bison?
That one's owned by the Nature Conservancy, I recall. So we're always looking for partners, but I guess it would be up to them if they would put bison there or not.
So Jennifer says, fascinating bison genetic story. I may have missed it, but what is the goal with the number of animals in Minnesota under the bison management plan?
Our goal is 500 between all our partners. So not necessarily 500 at one site, but 500 across those sites that I mentioned and the partners that I mentioned. So we're almost halfway there.
Do you have to augment feeding in the winter like this one?
Yes. So bison can jump 6 feet high. So they're hard to keep fenced in. So the way you keep bison fenced in is you keep them very happy. And we do that, so we do prairie hay that we harvest from our state parks in another part of the park. We do prairie hay and just feed them that during the winter just to keep them from roaming, because they would naturally, in the winter, they would move around and look for new areas. And they use their head like a plow, and they just move that snow and look for the grass underneath. So we offer that so that they're happy and don't test the fence.
Yep. Has there been much loss from predation or winter weather?
No, bison do not care about hard winters. They're just totally fine. The only loss we've really had is if an animal would fight with another one and gore someone, which they have a pecking order, and they can rustle each other around, so someone could get a horn stuck in the wrong place. But we haven't really had any predation from any outside predators or anything.
Very good. This one comes from Jake. What is the best way to learn about Dakota heritage and cultural while being respectful to tribal members and their past and the past? Richard?
Well, there's plenty of information on internet, and again, there you got to be careful who and checking the sources. A lot of tribal colleges have that are accredited now and have awesome information. I think U of M employs a lot of Native people and a lot of state schools, like Minneopa utilizes Gwen Westerman, I think, and so there's a lot of knowledge out there, and that people can access through even the public library. But even going on to a reservation, usually a lot of places have a cultural center that are willing to share, and websites like Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux tribe we have our website that has information and links that you
Okay.
can get information from.
Molly, I think this one related back to your presentation, but what was the name of the Dakota language instructor that helped you with
Yeah,
the
so that was
translation stuff?
actually Glenn and Gwen Westerman. They both are professors there and are married. Have both helped us with that. Yep.
Okay. This one comes from Caitlin. Is there a time of year that's best to see bison at the parks you mentioned? For example, are they more active in certain seasons compared to others?
It's more about time of day. They will be more active closer to the morning and before dusk. And then usually kind of mid-afternoon, they will sit down and just rest. And it's amazing because they're big animals, but once they lay down in that prairie, you just think they're rocks out there. They blend right in. So people do like to come when the babies are born because the little cute cinnamon calves are an enjoyment to see. And that typically starts around Mother's Day.
Okay.
That is also when we get super busy. So keep that in mind if you don't want the crowds, go during the weekday.
We have got an abundance of questions. We will go through as many as we can in the time that we have. So we've got about 5 minutes, so we'll try to move along here. How big is the area at Blue Mountain the animals have to roam?
Blue Mountains is 530 acres.
Perfect. Any plans to change out the breeding bulls at Minneopa State Park?
Yes. We move our bulls at every location about every 4 years, and we'll bring the new bulls in as yearlings so that they don't fight.
Okay. Could the Agassiz Wildlife Refuge support bison? It's in northwest Minnesota.
They could. They have cattle right now, and I'd really like them to have bison instead. So Tell your refuge manager.
You mentioned the excess bison can be auctioned off. Who buys them? I would think that there are many tribal nations that could be looking for some.
Yes, that is true. And we are working with the national, the Intertribal Buffalo Association to try to make those more available because there is a great demand from tribes across North America. But usually people want breeding females. You only need one bull, but you need a lot of breeding females. So if you're a new male born, you're not quite as valuable. So that's typically what we're auctioning off.
Okay. The Afton herd, is that connected to any program?
That's at the Bellwin Conservancy. What they do is they bring a herd in during the summer to use the grazing benefits of the bison, and then they move them out. So that is a privately owned meat production herd that they're kind of using as a conservation grazing technique.
Okay. Is there a decent opportunity to work with private land owners to expand habitat availability and expand herds?
That would be pretty awesome. We are doing that, I'd say, with cattle on our WMAs right now, where local landowners adjacent to a wildlife management area could bring their cattle on so we get the benefit of the grazing and move them off. We haven't done that with bison yet, but I know of one bison producer who's interested, and we're hoping that will come in the future.
Taylor had kind of a long question here. I'll see if I can break it down just a little. Are there any other large mammals that are tied to the indigenous populations? And with similar conservation efforts ongoing?
Well, like I said, the four-legged out there, the different four-legged have like moose, bear, elk, deer, especially black-tailed deer. Those different Oyates have very close ties to our culture in different ways with their own different teachings and medicines that they have.
Okay. Linda offered some information and Karen asked the question, but according to Como Zoo website, they have 3 bison and a calf was born last June. So there, we got that one. What can we do to help support the efforts to bring bison back to Minnesota and beyond?
Well, I think we've been amazed at the amount of support the new herd at Minneopa has gotten, so we really appreciate visitors coming to enjoy them. I'd say the best way is supporting those, the ways we get funded, which is the Environmental Natural Trust Fund, the lottery money, and the legacy amendment. That will be up for, I guess, re-election in a few years. So make sure you support that legacy amendment because that's how we fund our bison conservation herd.
Okay. Has the Prairie Island Native community been considered as part of the partners?
They're not one of our official partners because their goals are a little bit different, but they are doing kind of their own great work towards bison conservation. And Richard might have more to share about that.
Yeah, they have an awesome website on YouTube that I think that has a lot of neat information in what they're doing that really speaks for itself that I enjoy looking at. So, but yeah, our sister tribe has brought back bison and are doing quite well with it and their numbers. In fact, I think they have a little too much that they want to work with and getting out.
Okay. So sadly, we have used all of our available time. And we still have probably 15 or 20 questions that we're not going to get to. But Molly, if they reach out to you, would you be able to answer
Yep.
questions emailed? Okay.
Yep. That would be fine.
So if you got questions, you can reach out to Molly. And
I'll put it in the chat here.
Okay. With that, I want to thank our two guest presenters today, Richard Milda and Molly Tranel Nelson. This was a very, very interesting program to me today. I have eaten buffalo meat. It's some of the best meat that I've ever, wild game that I've tried. And so it'd be interesting to see bison become more of a main food source for everybody. Really, it's good stuff. With that, thank you, everyone. You guys have any parting thoughts? We're getting lots of applause, hearts.
Thanks for the opportunity. I love talking about bison, so.
Great.
Yep,
Thank
same
you all
here.
so much.
Thank you for listening. Doksha.
Okay, we're going to go back to the practice room. So